Yes. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, World War II ended for Germany and North Atlantic nation 32 years ago with the fall of the Berlin Wall. In Ukraine, World War II ended 25 years later with the Maidan. It means 7 years ago. What was the Maidan? The Maidan was a spontaneous youth rebellion with millions of followers. The center of this movement was named Independence Maidan in the center of Kyiv, and the movement lasted from the end of November 2013 through February 2014. The people of Ukraine rebelled because they felt they were too often deceived by the authorities. This nation of protesters included people of all ages, social standings, and religious denominations. They spoke in different languages, Ukrainian, Russian, and came to Kyiv from all regions of Ukraine. An archetypical person from the Maidan was a slave who rose from his knees because he or she felt that such a kneeling position is unnatural for a human being. Hundreds of thousands of people participated in these outbursts, and because of this, the Maidan movement was named the Revolution of Dignity. An uprising of slaves does not mean that the slaves are fully transformed by their freedom. Some of us will return to slavery. Today, the most insidious slavery for any Ukrainian is corruption. It accompanies him even before his birth, from his conception and unto death and even burial. But once the slave has tasted freedom, he can no longer exist without this life-giving spirit. The Maidan was a territory of freedom where mutual respect, mutual assistance, solidarity, and freedom prevailed. Why did people die at the Maidan? For a Christian, and not only for Christians, it is impossible to imagine the Maidan without God's providence. In fact, it was an atheist who said that to me. She, a Greek Catholic priest at the revolution. The Maidan was akin to a celestial battle which arose in even between angel of light and the unknown angel. After the battle, the first angel was named Satan and the other Mychailo. The reward of the unknown angel who asked who is like God was his name Mychailo. Others follow him. The power of authority and legitimacy was in the hand of the leader of the angel, the future Satan. The power of freedom and the search for truth seemed smaller and not as authoritative. It had not obviously guidance. But with this freedom and truth changed everything. The same happened in Kyiv from November 2013. The peaceful people of the Maidan, armed with smiles and in search of dignity, had their freedom of expression and protest restricted by the armored forces. But these forces could not extinguish the revolution of spirit, so they brutally attacked and murdered their ideological opponents. What the post-Soviet nomenclatura reigning in Kyiv did not understand was that a human being consists not only of the body, but it also has the spirit and soul. The hope for the power of good, faith in Almighty, and the feeling that evil is a denial of goodness, these were the victorious weapon of the Maidan. The religious aspect of the Maidan. The Maidan was not organized by any church authority, presbyter or layman. At first, the people at the Maidan were afraid of being co-opted by a religious group, so they even did not allow clergy to speak into a microphone. The same treatment was given to politicians. However, as the Maidan became a true revolution of the spirit, it delved into a depth of our human nature, our search for ultimate meaning of life, our quest to understand the deepest existential questions. The Maidan turned every participant's face to their creator. It could not be otherwise. As the Holy Spirit of Christians helped open to the heart and minds of all people to a higher being, non-Christians created a community of solidarity, which became the church outside the institutional church. Here, many Christian churches found their place in the sun. They participated, served, and blessed offering brought by people. In that place, a mutual dialogue between church and society arose, where both groups learned from each other. This bred confidence and trust because they saw in each other sincere seekers of righteousness, not from an earthly perspective, but from a perspective of the wisdom of God. The priestly mission at the Maidan is a sacrifice of all who are baptized, and the blood of unbaptized, for the love of their neighbor. The mission of a presbyter is to offer sacrifice in the name of Christ in the Eucharist sacrifice. So the sacrifice of all became dear to the Lord. Those who brought their secular ministry to the Maidan deeply felt the need for such sacrifice because it led them to good and to a personal conversion. I must add one important fact, that without 25 years of Catholic social education in Western Ukraine, accompanied with the hard work of Greek Catholic clergy and laity, such a revolution of the spirit with the result we experiences at the Maidan would not be possible today in Ukraine. The ennoblement and conversion of every person is the main challenge of the Maidan moving forward. Will the Maidan move from the central square of Kyiv to the heart of millions of Ukrainians? If so, then the 10 commandments, which are inscribed into each person by the Creator, not withstanding their religion or worldview, will become the basis of the new social order. If not, then the lack of transparency in human relations and a duality of truth will again spread to inaccessible levels, and people will once again rise up against evil. But along the way, they will needlessly partake of the poison of self-deception. In this regard, Christian social communities should be a true example to others. The theology of Maidan. We also have another tool in this regard, called the Theology of Maidan. The purpose of this theology is to assist in articulating the interaction of people with God that manifested itself during the Maidan revolution in Kyiv, and in turning that interaction into a life-giving theology for the further good-like growth of man. The theology of Maidan can be called theology from the inside, which was formed from within the critical social situation and under the pressure of society. The theology of Maidan arises in an attempt to recognize the theological meaning of social transformations. Therefore, the theology of Maidan is a diverse, supra-confessional, free thought about God and life that was born and it expressed on the basis of experiences of the revolution of dignity. This experience is a theology as articulate the knowledge that comes from an internal voice, and the author of it is God, the Creator, or someone unknown, based on the thoughts of one person or another. This theology is not closed, and professional theologians and spokesmen of the church hierarchy to be in its service should act in sync with the people, and in that case, they can feel its effects more strongly. The theologizing people. The theology of Maidan is articulated in particular action of the people of God who, with help of the Holy Spirit, transform the old rights and vice of thinking into a new and fruitful ecclesial energy. The church as an institution in acting here is a way that is unusual for the Byzantine worldview. According to the later, the clergy in their activity mostly expect only obedience and reception from the laity. The journalist Maxim Virchow, in his article Maidan, the Reloading of Christianity, leads us in this topic of a change in thinking, which can bring us the experience of Maidan revolution with such critical words. The belief began to drift from the existential choice towards the attribute of identity, or worse, domestic magic. In general, there has been a tendency towards devaluation and religiousness and faith in self. But here, Maidan happened. During the Maidan revolution, and as a result of it, according to the author, the following specific change occurred. First, the reloading of image of priest. Many, even among believers, perceive priests as people not of this world, who say things that are correct but abstract and alienated from reality. Maidan destroyed this stereotype. It became apparent that the priest can be a pastor not only at the pulpit, but outside it. Second, the quality of religiosity has also changed. The prayer often becomes just an exercise of good tone, and to visit church is a visit of courtesy. When 3 months of anxious waiting are behind you, and ahead of you there is a real perspective to die or to be wounded, many things are treated more seriously. What is the value of just the crosses that was painted on homemade shields of people of Maidan? However, this also applies to millions of Ukrainians who were watching events from afar. In fact, among the main slogans of the Maidan was pray for Ukraine. Third, Maidan served as a severe and even cruel test for churches. Within days, they found themselves thrown out of their comfort zone and were forced to define their strategies. Moreover, this was not only required at the level of mere declarations, but required concrete action. At the same time, the actions could have very unpredictable consequences for both individual priests and for churches in general. The interconnection of theological trends. The theology of Maidan can be compared with the theology of Exodus as an understanding of particular exemplary story which, though not universal, can serve others going beyond a particular context. The theology of Maidan exists at the same level as the liberation theology, the theology of revolution, the theology of power and conflict, the theology of discontent, the theology of change, the theology of society, and finally, the theology of the cross or the hope, theology of hope. Concerning the theology of liberty, the theology of Maidan can be considered as a separate branch that should continue to develop in order to help Christians and all people with less sacrifice to deal in a more Christian and expedited way with social emergency situations which often occur on all continents of the world. It is the theology of the overcoming of fear which exists in this digital era, and for this reason, it can be considered and perceived by whole of society beyond the institutional or national boundaries. What are ideological proposals of Maidan? Having outlined the general features of the theology of Maidan, let us consider the specific theological proposals of Maidan. For a person's likening to God and likening of society to the body of Christ. During the revolution and afterward, through a change of one's values, priority, and their internalization, through the development of new relationship within a corrupt human being and degraded society. Through prayer, protesters themselves developed their public theology, sketching ideals and outlines of aspired civil society they aspired to. The place of prayer among protesters. Perhaps this was how UGCC, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, was perceived by officials who had behind the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, when in January 2014, they wrote a threatening letter to Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk. The primate of UGCC confirmed their fears, which were not clearly defined in the letter, namely that the theology mentioned above is a language of fair revolution. I quote, "The church is not a participant in politics, but is an integral part of civil society. We are convinced that a prayer for peace together with those who in peaceful way show the desire to live in a legal state is an appropriate prayer. This word of patriarch can be interpreted as follows. Through prayer, protesters themselves develop their political theology, outlining the ideals and outlines of their civil society. As the famous Ukrainian theologian Kirill Hovorun said, Maidan expressed itself through religious symbols and appealed to ethical axioms in strictly religious terms. Maidan, revolutionary in its essence, became a prayer zone, a place for human cooperation with the Almighty through a new, meaningful dialogue with God. The heart of person of Maidan became a field in which a person started to speak not only with his neighbor or opponent, but also with God. The religious scholar Lyudmila Filipovich said, Maidan taught people to listen to themselves and others. It taught such things which maybe people before never did. It taught us to pray, personally and collectively. Prayers have changed people's minds as they brought with the ideas of reconciliation, love, respect, and as they gave hope, these people united. Since prayer is a dialogue, the custom of prayers can be the result of the recognized manifestation of the other world, that is, the meeting of different people during Maidan with the burning bush. Whether they know or do not yet know God. Such a meeting, it was described by journalist Vartan Kipiani. I quote, "We stood so tight that there was no way to see who was behind. I was back protected by a strong and silent man. He did not speak obscenely, did not shout commands. He just protected me," and began to read the prayer. I cannot repeat any line, but it was so strong and timely that I repeated what he said about myself. Now that I recall the events of that night that enveloped me, I am sure this was not a priest, it was he. Shared Eucharist. Beside the common origins and memory about the one pre-union tradition of the Church of Kyiv, the people who prayed during Maidan were united through the same Eucharist, the common chalice, which solves all division of the local Church of Christ, goes beyond the framework of non-dogmatic canons and restores the unity of community. The theologian Vasil Rudeyko said, there were such cases when Greek Catholics and Orthodox prayed together during the liturgy in a prayer tent. It seems to me that now, when our churches know about such cases, they ignore it. They just think that someone intervening there. People during Maidan demonstrated the absolute insignificance of the church schism. Such a schism doesn't exist in the reality. Actually, when Ukrainians have stood up and started to fight evil, Christianity was clearly seen there. There were no Roman Catholics, Greek Catholics, or Orthodox of different confessions. There were only Christians. And this was clearly seen. And this is something that everyone needs to realize. Lyudmila Filipovich said, Maidan is a new level of ecclesial consciousness. This statement is probably deeper than appear at first glance, because Christian prayer to God can be significant not only for Christians. Maidan prayer has changed the boundary of the Abrahamic religious and extended the boundary of the Church of Christ beyond his terrestrial contours, leading it to divine authenticity. A thought-out, conscious prayer, in other words, theology, may in future fulfill the role of consensus and mutual social obligation. About it, in the words of Catherine Warner, after the Maidan, the task of society will be to formulate a political identity that can explain the values and norms by which different groups of Ukrainians will be governed. A prayer changes people and moves people in the opposite direction, that is, to the kingdom of God. Most brightly, it was redefined by those who experiences moral, fiery, armored attacks while, while, while being in the minority without hatred and little weapons. At that moment, they felt God's protection. The image of it is Orthodox monks, Protestant pastors, Greek Catholic laymen, Buddhist followers, which once stand on between two forces. This experience of beauty among ugliness has led to the appearance of new neurons that can greatly change our thinking. Theology needs a temple. As the nature of maternal bosom is a temple, in a similar way, Maidan is a temple of God. The theologian Taras Timur said this: when people are gathering, an internal connection between them appears, and it provides new energy and greater result than expected. Significant here is fact of celebration, of celebrating a liturgy on Maidan. Moreover, that this initiative comes from the laity, not from clergy. Even the architectural form of the Maidan appears as if it was intended for liturgy. There, in one Eucharistic chalice, a common blood was spilled. There happened the highest sacrifice that a person can offer, to give his life for his friends. Maidan is a full value church of all the faithful, with a level of clericalization that corresponds to the task of serving the community, and with a strong presence of catechumens. A philologist, Rostislav Baranko, selective level in a very, very profound essence of sacrifice, Maidan was Christian. Maidan is a confirmation of biblical look at gender relations, especially related to Ukrainian men. During the Revolution of Dignity, they found their leading role of defender of truth with a strictly defended responsibility, which is different for a female social role. I say this without denying the statement of Sarah Phillips, who writes about some of the lost opportunities for women to participate in the risky, dangerous action of Maidan. However, I would like to emphasize the noble influence of the Maidan protester on the action freeing men from the state of infantilism, which is not uncommon among Christians in Ukraine. The artist Uliana Onyszczuk remembers this as follows. It's a courage in the best meaning of the word. They stand like a wall. Public theology. Maidan is the awareness that Christian and moral principle, as well as religious symbols, thought belonging to a person's private sphere, have a every right to be publicly expressed. It is a belief that the public presence will be effective if they carry the component of love towards every person and the person's inner world. In the words of philosopher Yaroslav Yushchko, after the revolution, it becomes clear that the key factor or indication, the role of churches will be the ability to enter the vanguard of profound social and moral transformations. Maidan showed that the society can be organizationally and functionally different based on the consciousness of its member. It is possible only at the high level of consciousness of all citizens which should be formed. And today, there is no institution other than the church which has such a high level of public confidence, such experience, and such knowledge. Therefore, it is capable to take into account the thoughts and position of everyone. Such kind of theological background of social dialogue was highlighted by the famous French Orthodox historian Antoine Arjakovsky. The church received an historical chance to see the society not like a passive consumer of sacraments, but like active, that is able to form the favorable conditions for dialogue. The theologian Andrei Androshkiv presents another feature of theology characterizing by Maidan, the realization that it is not necessary to cooperate with people who behave in a manifestly evil way. He told the soldier cadet on December 10, and on an evening every day in any church, a psalm with the following lines is sung. Blessed is the man who does not go to the counsel of the wicked. I say, guys, you are not cooperating with the wicked people who simply beat people. At this time, they just beating. You have a great chance to sabotage this. Andrushki also speaks about a people God bearing, who overcomes fear as follows. The one who was there in those heavy times, all of them should be considered. Those line of women, students, beautiful uncles who were pounding the cobblestone without the time for even a snack, they are so different. This kind of fearlessness reminds us to the film Hard to Kill, 1990, in which Stefan Seagal plays a policeman who honestly and independently fights an immense and stronger mafia than he, just by the strength of his morality and intelligence. Someone said, if we are more moral, then we will win. So, on Maidan, the instinct of self-preservation fell into the background, giving precedence to Pravda, to truth, and the quest for freedom. This was the fidelity of the idea backed by the fidelity of its duty. In conclusion, about the theology of Maidan, a few words about normalcy in the theological sense, about the need to be religiously normal in a civil society. This is proclaimed by the theology of Maidan. For example, in these words of Russian queer woman Alexandra Nazarova, and people behaves the way people should behave, and the church did what I think church must do, and it was very strange, and suddenly it all became common. In all times, and especially in peaceful times, good primarily requires activity, non-passivity. This can be understood from the testimony of Taras Temor, who says, when I was asked to give a cobblestone, I refused, because that was for me part of evil, complicity in sin. I give someone a stone and he throws this stone on the head of another person. I could not do it. And on the second day, when turning to the cobblestone, helped to cocktails were and burn the tires. It was already perceived as a struggle for the truth. The fruits, that said, the fruit of the Maidan is already present in Ukrainian society. From the Soviet citizens of Ukraine was formed a Ukrainian nation, a nation who speaks Ukrainian and Russian. And now we still have new generations of people who do not know what the Soviet Union and the dictatorship of communist ideology mean. There was a turning point in the consciousness of the typical Ukrainian citizen. That bad laws should not be obeyed, because God's law and man's conscience should be essential component of an effective and fair law. Members of society began to come to life and realized that they also contribute, not only to lend credibility, but to help serve society, especially through dialogue and vigilance. In addition, the churches were changed. They realized their arrogance and that they cannot simply serve neighbor in their own name, but must serve in the name of God. They understood that they also have a common sin, which makes their testimony of Christ false for many people. The name of the sin is the horrific separation of Christians. The phenomenon of Lenin fall became very widespread when the idol of communism was finally removed from the main square of Ukrainian villages and cities. It was a national phenomenon of a communist religion, which killed millions of people for an angel of darkness. We hope that Christian missionaries with a faith in the I'm sorry, with a faith in the true God. The Russian Ukrainian War. Another negative consequences of the Maidan was the Russian military invasion of Ukraine. This happened because the spirit of a free society is not acceptable to the post-Soviet nomenclatura, which currently controls the Russian Federation. It was to no avail that so-called experts organized repression at the Maidan, and not even snipers killing innocent people could stop the inevitable. The Russian Federation lost this battle because World War II finally ended in Ukraine at the Maidan, and the process of the destruction of nihilistic dictatorship will certainly proceed in the future to Russia. The old nomenclatura feels that it needs to stop this, and it done only by starting a new world war. Therefore, war in the Ukrainian Crimea, Donbass, and Luhansk is not just a war against Ukraine, but against the spirit of dignity, of free difficulty and limitation by the European Union and democratic world. This is why Maidan is so terrible in its consequences for post-Soviet Russia's ruling elite and Belarus, because it restores deep Christian values and meaning. The Maidan raised the bar for an understanding of freedom not only in the sphere of Russian interests, but also for the entire North Atlantic region. Freedom is not only about power and economy, it is also about values. Those values in which the builder of the European coal and steel community believe. This is the price of the current war in Ukraine. Conclusion. If we still believe in the human person who has his or her own dignity, which transforms into a world and the law, then no matter what challenges arise in the future of our civilization, we will worthily and peacefully overcome them. Let those words of hope be especially valuable to us Christians in Europe, in the world, including Russia. In all circumstances, with the daily example of our life, we must express the values for which we currently struggle in Ukraine. The line between good and evil was never the Berlin Wall, nor is it the Russian-Ukrainian border today. This line runs through the heart of every one of us when we decide every day whether to remain part of the problem or becoming participants in the solution. Let us be warriors for good. This is the meaning of Maidan, which I have experiences at which I carry to my heart for my own joy or for every person of goodwill on earth. This is meaning of the Maidan I wanted to share with you, my dear friend. To complete this speech, I want to present you a few words of the president of Association of Ukrainian Banks, Alexander Sogulyako. Maidan is a place where hundreds of thousands of people gathered who won a moral victory about themselves. They survived as winners for a month. Then went away and again became to do the same because their leaders were not among the moral winners. But it remains a fact that they could do it. We must show ourselves and the world a way out of the crisis in which we are in the world. Crisis of morality, crisis of politics, crisis of the economy, crisis of ecology. All of them are rooted in a moral crisis. Can we overcome? So, the Lord can overcome this crisis only through us. How should I be so that through me the Lord will do it? I must change, and there is not other way. Thank you.